The Sorgoth had come to Earth like a storm, ruthless and unstoppable. With their advanced technology and towering war machines, they easily crushed human defenses. For years, the alien race mocked Earth's forces, calling them weak, primitive, and laughable. But the Sorgoth's most frequent target of ridicule was humanity's snipers. To them, the idea of a single soldier armed with nothing more than a rifle and keen eyesight was ridiculous. They didn't understand that the strength of humanity lay not in weapons or technology, but in its will to survive. Now, the war was on the brink of defeat. Earth's cities had crumbled, its defenses shattered. Humanity's last hope rested in a small resistance group, struggling to hold on as the Sorgoth closed in. The human fleet was scattered, and Earth's ground forces had been pushed into a few isolated strongholds. But there was still one final mission that could change the course of the war. Private Ellie Sanders was part of that mission. A sniper with exceptional skill, she had already earned a reputation among the humans who still fought to protect their world. But Ella was more than just a soldier, she was a survivor. Her family had perished during the first wave of Sorgoth attacks, and ever since, she had sworn to herself that she would not let their deaths be in vain. She and a small team of elite soldiers were given the task of taking out the Sorgoth general, the ruthless leader who had orchestrated much of the destruction. The general was located deep in enemy territory, heavily guarded and surrounded by a vast Sorgoth army. The mission seemed impossible. No one expected them to survive, let alone succeed. The Sorgoth forces were everywhere, and humanity was running out of time. But Ella had faith in one thing, her training. Her rifle, though not as advanced as the Sorgoth's weapons, was her tool for survival. With it, she had taken out enemies from incredible distances, hitting targets that others believed were unreachable. She had trained for this moment her entire life. The night before the mission, Ella lay awake, staring up at the dark sky above their base. She thought about her family, her fallen comrades, and the Earth she was fighting to protect. The weight of the mission was heavy, but she couldn't afford to falter. Tomorrow, they would make their move. When dawn broke, the team set out. The plan was simple, though dangerous: infiltrate the Sorgoth stronghold and eliminate the general. Their chances were slim, but for LA, it was a mission worth taking. Every step felt like an eternity as they crept closer to their target. The landscape around them was scarred by years of conflict, and the air smelled of dust and ash. Every tree, every building, every rock felt like a reminder of everything Earth had already lost. Ella and her team advanced silently, moving from cover to cover. They had to be careful. The Sorgoth were everywhere, their technology allowing them to detect even the slightest movement. But Ella was patient. She had always been patient. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached their position, a high vantage point on a cliff overlooking the Sorgoth command center. The general was in sight, surrounded by dozens of his elite guards. They were well armed and ready for battle. The odds of success were near zero. The rest of the team set up their position, preparing for their part of the mission, but it was Ella's shot that would make all the difference. She crouched down behind a boulder, focusing on her target. Her fingers gripped the rifle tightly, her breath steady. She'd taken hundreds of shots in training, but this was different. This wasn't just any shot, this was the shot that could change everything. The Sorgoth general stood tall, surrounded by his guards. He was speaking to his officers, unaware of the humans preparing to strike. Ella's eyes narrowed as she lined up her shot. The wind was light, the air thin. Her heart beat in her chest like a drum, but she remained calm. The distance was vast, several miles, but she had trained for moments like this. Ella took a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the air like a thunderclap. The bullet flew straight and true, cutting through the air at incredible speed. It hit its mark right at the heart of the Sorgoth general, piercing through his armor. The general collapsed to the ground, dead before he even realized what had happened. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. The Sorgoth soldiers froze, looking around in confusion. They had never believed Earth snipers could be a real threat. But now, their leader was dead, and they were thrown into disarray. As the Sorgoth army began to panic, the human resistance seized the opportunity. The rest of the team moved in, taking out key targets and disabling the Sorgoth defenses. The enemy, without leadership and without direction, began to falter. What had seemed like an impossible mission suddenly turned into a turning point for humanity. The Sorgoth forces, shaken and disoriented, started to retreat, realizing that they had underestimated Earth's power. Ella's shot had done more than eliminate a key leader, it had disrupted the entire Sorgoth command. It had shown the universe that Earth's snipers, though seen as primitive by their enemies, were deadly beyond measure. The battle wasn't over yet, but the war had changed. The humans now had the upper hand, and the Sorgoth knew that they had a real fight on their hands. For the first time in years, the human forces could breathe a little easier. They had hope. Ella lowered her rifle and stood tall, her heart racing. It wasn't just a victory for Earth, it was a victory for every soldier who had ever fought for humanity's survival. And it all started with one shot. The last stand Earth was on the edge of collapse. The cities, once bustling with life and hope, were now crumbling ruins. The Zarksoks, a ruthless alien race with unmatched technology, had invaded Earth with a single purpose: to wipe out humanity. Their ships were massive, their weapons deadly, and their forces seemed unstoppable. To the Zarksoks, Earth's last line of defense, the human snipers were nothing more than outdated relics, easily crushed beneath their advanced firepower. But they didn't know the power of Earth's will. Captain Jason Taylor was one of the last remaining leaders of humanity's resistance. He'd seen it all: the destruction of his hometown, the fall of countless cities, and the loss of friends and comrades. Yet, through all the suffering, he refused to give up. Earth's snipers, a small but skilled team, were his final defense. If they failed, humanity would be finished. The Zarks were relentless. Their enormous fleet was closing in on Earth's last stronghold, a fortress buried deep in the mountains. It was the humans' final refuge, a place where the last remaining soldiers could make one final stand. The resistance knew this would be their last battle, but Jason and his snipers weren't ready to give up just yet. "We can't let them land," Jason muttered as he watched the Zark's fleet approach. His voice was low, but his words carried a heavy weight. "If they land, it's over. We have to stop them here." Jason's team of snipers were positioned along a ridge, camouflaged among the rocks and trees. They were the best of the best, chosen for their ability to hit impossible targets from unimaginable distances. But even they knew the odds were stacked against them. The Zarks had overwhelming numbers and superior technology. Yet, Jason had always believed that the human spirit could overcome even the most powerful forces. "Target the largest ship," Jason ordered. His eyes were fixed on the fleet in the sky. The largest Zark ship, the Dreadnought, was the heart of their fleet. If it fell, the entire invasion would crumble. "We need one shot to count." The snipers nodded in silent agreement. Time was running out. The Zarks were just moments away from landing. If they succeeded in setting foot on Earth, humanity would never recover. Jason surveyed the Dreadnought from his perch. It was a massive, sleek vessel bristling with weapons. The ship's weak point, however, was the power core, a small, unprotected section near the center. Jason's eyes narrowed as he calculated the distance, wind speed, and angle. It wasn't an easy shot, but if anyone could make it, it was him. He adjusted his scope, breathing in slowly. His heart beat in his chest, steady and calm. He had made shots like this before, but never with so much at stake. The fate of humanity rested on this moment. "Ready, Captain," one of his snipers, Sergeant Lisa Reed, called out. Jason didn't answer. He simply exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out through the mountains, cutting through the still air like a thunderclap. The bullet flew, its path perfect. It struck the weak point of the Dreadnought's power core, just as Jason had planned. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the Dreadnought exploded in a burst of blinding light. The shockwave rippled through the air, and the giant ship came crashing down, its massive frame torn apart by the force of the explosion. The other Zark ships immediately began to panic. Without their leader, without their flagship, their entire fleet was in disarray. The aliens' communication systems failed, their ships lost power, and their weapons malfunctioned. It was chaos. Jason's team didn't hesitate. They opened fire on the now vulnerable ships, taking down several smaller vessels with precision shots. The Zarks, realizing they were under attack from the humans, tried to retreat. Within moments, the once mighty Zarks fleet was a chaotic mess of malfunctioning ships crashing through the skies. The invaders, now leaderless and confused, began to flee in panic. They never expected humans to be capable of such an attack. Jason's heart raced as he watched the alien fleet scatter. The dreadnought was gone, and with it, the Zarks' chance of victory. The snipers had succeeded against all odds. They had taken down the heart of the enemy's invasion with a single shot. "Nice shot, Captain," Lisa said, a smile in her voice. Jason lowered his rifle and looked out at the retreating fleet. The war wasn't over yet, but this was the turning point. The Zarks had underestimated Earth's snipers, and they had paid the price. Humanity's fight for survival was far from over, but today, the Zarks had learned that Earth was not as weak as they thought. With their fleet scattered and their forces in disarray, the Zarks retreated, leaving Earth's last defender standing tall. Jason looked at his team, each of them exhausted but determined. They had proven the power of human will. Despite the overwhelming odds, despite the advanced technology of their enemies, humanity had fought back and won. "Today," Jason said, his voice strong, "we've shown them what humans can do." This is just the beginning. The shot that changed everything, the Varnak, had been unstoppable. For years, they had swept across the galaxy, conquering planet after planet with terrifying efficiency. Their weapons were powerful, their armies vast, and their technology far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Earth was their final target, and it was no different from the dozens of worlds they had already destroyed. To the Varnak, Earth was just another obstacle to crush. They mocked Earth's snipers, laughing at the idea of a few humans with rifles posing any real threat. Primitive, they called them. Outdated, they said. The Varnak believed their high-tech weapons and massive fleet would easily wipe out the last of humanity's resistance. They had no idea just how wrong they were. As the Varnak fleet entered Earth's orbit, humanity's last line of defense began to crumble. The cities had fallen, the military was scattered, and the people were desperate. The resistance had one final stronghold in the mountains, and it was quickly becoming the last bastion of hope. Earth's final hope rested with a small group of soldiers, led by Sergeant Mark Harrison, a battle-hardened sniper known for his deadly accuracy. Mark had seen it all. He had fought in countless battles, watching his friends and comrades fall in the fight for Earth's survival. He had been on the front lines when the Varnak first arrived, and now he stood in the shadows of the last human stronghold, his rifle aimed at the heart of the alien force. The Varnak commander, Lord Rakan, was a ruthless leader who had personally overseen the destruction of countless worlds. He was stationed on the command ship, a towering fortress in space, surrounded by a massive fleet. If Lord Rakan wasn't stopped, Earth would be finished. The entire resistance would fall. Mark's mission was clear: take out Lord Rakan before he could destroy Earth. It seemed impossible. The Varnak fleet was too large, their ships too powerful, and Lord Rakan was protected by hundreds of elite guards. But Mark wasn't one to back down. He had been trained for moments like this. "Sir, the target is in sight," his spotter, Private Emily Price, said over the comms. Emily had been by Mark's side for years, always calm under pressure. They had trained together, fought together, and survived together. Today, she knew, would be their final stand. Mark peered through his scope, scanning the distance. The Varnak command ship was far away, hovering high above Earth. From this distance, even the slightest error could be catastrophic. The wind was light, the air thin, but the target was clear. Lord Rakan stood at the helm of the ship, oblivious to the threat that lay ahead. "Steady, Emily," Mark said quietly. "This is it." Emily watched the readouts on her screen, calculating the distance and wind speed. She knew how dangerous this shot was. "You've got this, Sergeant." Mark took a deep breath, steadying his aim. His mind was clear. This was the moment he had trained for, the shot that could change everything. He had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. The fate of humanity rested on his shoulders. With a slow exhale, Mark squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, sharp and true. It traveled across the sky, cutting through the atmosphere and heading straight for Lord Racken's command center. The bullet was specially designed to pierce the alien ship's defenses, but even with that, hitting the control center from this distance was a near impossible feat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ship's entire control center erupted in a blinding explosion. The shockwave rippled through the fleet, and the massive command ship began to fall from the sky, its once pristine structure now in ruins. The Varnak fleet went into chaos. Without their leader, without direction, their ships began to malfunction. Communications between the ships were scrambled. The aliens were disoriented, confused, and unable to react. The powerful Varnak forces, once so confident in their victory, were now in disarray. Mark watched through his scope as the Varnak fleet stumbled in panic. Their ships began to retreat, firing wildly in all directions. The once imposing fleet was now a mess of confusion, with ships crashing into each other, fleeing in every direction. The chaos was complete. "Mark, they're retreating," Emily said, her voice filled with disbelief. It worked. It actually worked. Mark didn't respond immediately. He simply lowered his rifle, watching the retreating Varnak ships with a steady gaze. It was hard to believe. The shot that had seemed impossible had changed everything. The Varnak, once so sure of their victory, were now retreating in fear. Humanity's forces, who had been on the brink of collapse, began to regroup. The resistance had seized the opportunity to strike. With the Varnak in disarray, the tide of the war began to shift. The humans had won their first victory in what felt like an eternity. Mark turned to Emily, a faint smile crossing his face. "We did it," he said quietly. The battle wasn't over. The war wasn't won. But for the first time in years, humanity had a real chance. The Varnak had underestimated Earth, thinking their technology and strength would be enough to crush humanity. They hadn't counted on the power of precision, the determination of one sniper, and the belief that even the smallest action could change the course of history. Mark Harrison's shot had done just that. The mocking ends for years. The Kregath had laughed at Earth's resistance. The war-hungry alien race had invaded humanity's colonies, mocking Earth's forces as weak and primitive. To them, the idea of Earth's snipers was a joke. They saw them as little more than outdated soldiers armed with old weapons, no match for the Kregath's advanced technology and brutal strength. But the Kregath had underestimated humanity. They never fully understood what made humans so dangerous. They thought they could easily crush the last pockets of resistance, that Earth's defenders would crumble like the other conquered worlds. But the Kregath had made one mistake: the humans had a secret weapon, and it wasn't in their technology. It was in their will to fight, their ability to overcome impossible odds. And that weapon was embodied in a single, deadly skill: the sniper shot. Lieutenant Sarah Dawson was the leader of one such sniper unit, a small group of the best marksmen left on Earth. She had seen everything fall apart: her family, her home, her world. Sarah was a brilliant sniper, one of the most skilled in the resistance, but she wasn't just a soldier. She carried the weight of her past with her, the memories of those she lost in the war. Earth's forces were scattered, its colonies destroyed, and the Kregath fleet had arrived to finish what they had started. Humanity had no more time. The final battle for Earth had begun. Sarah's team, though outnumbered and outgunned, was determined to make their stand. They were positioned high in the mountains, with a clear view of the battlefield below. The Kregath fleet hovered in the sky, massive and intimidating, their ships darkening the cloud. Their leader, War Commander Thrax, stood at the helm of his flagship, confident in his victory. He had crushed dozens of human worlds already, and this would be no different. "Sarah, the fleet is in position," said Corporal James Ellis, one of her most trusted snipers. "It's time. We have one shot at this." Sarah nodded, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the battlefield below. The odds were against them. The Kregath forces were too powerful, and their technology was far beyond anything humanity had. But Sarah didn't believe in fate. She believed in the power of the human will to survive, and she wasn't about to let that belief die. "We'll make our stand here," she said, her voice steady and calm despite the chaos around them. "We take out their leader, we take out their army, The plan was simple. They would target War Commander Thrax's flagship, the heart of the Kragath fleet. If they could take it down, it would throw the entire alien invasion into disarray. Without Thrax, the Kragath would lose their leader, their direction. The rest of the fleet would be left leaderless, and the humans might just have a chance. The snipers took their positions, their rifles steady in their hands. Sarah scanned the field below, her sharp eyes locking onto the Kragath flagship. She had studied the ship for days, memorizing its weaknesses, its patterns. She knew exactly where to strike. The only problem was the distance. The flagship was miles away, hovering high above the battlefield. "Sarah," Ellis said again, "the wind is strong and the distance is far. Are you sure you can make the shot?" Sarah's eyes never left the flagship. She had trained for moments like this, the impossible shots that would decide the fate of the war. She had lost so much already, but she wasn't about to lose Earth too. "I'm sure," she replied, her voice cold but determined. "This shot is the only chance we have." The wind howled around them, and the tension was thick. The Kragath forces below continued to advance, their soldiers marching forward, oblivious to the danger above. Sarah's team waited for the perfect moment. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, it came the moment she had been waiting for. War Commander Thrax stood at the front of the flagship, barking orders to his fleet. Sarah's heart raced, but her hands were steady. She could hear nothing but the sound of her own breath as she adjusted her scope. Every muscle in her body was focused on that single shot. "Now," she whispered to herself, "this is for Earth." With a calm breath, Sarah pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the mountains. The bullet flew through the air with deadly precision, cutting through the wind like a razor. It traveled for what seemed like an eternity, until it struck its target, the power core of the Kragath flagship. The explosion was immediate. The ship's control center erupted in a burst of light, and the flagship's systems went haywire. It began to plummet from the sky, crashing down into the enemy fleet with a catastrophic force. The Kragath fleet, without their leader, fell into chaos. The alien ships lost their coordination, and the once organized forces began to scatter. Without War Commander Thrax, the Kragath had no direction. The humans seized the opportunity. The remaining resistance fighters launched their final assault, taking out key targets in the alien fleet and causing widespread panic among the invaders. Sarah watched as the Kragath retreated, their fleet disintegrating before her eyes. She could hardly believe it. In one shot, she had turned the tide of the war. The Kragath, who had thought Earth snipers were nothing more than weak, primitive soldiers, had now seen just how dangerous humanity could be. As the last of the Kragath ships fled, Sarah lowered her rifle. Her team gathered around her, their faces filled with disbelief and awe. "We did it," Ellis said, his voice trembling. "We actually did it." Sarah didn't smile. She didn't need to. The battle was over, but the war for humanity's survival was far from won. The Kragath had learned a lesson they would never forget, that even the most advanced weapons and the most powerful fleets could be destroyed by something as simple as a sniper's shot.